Great, Judah, how are you doing?
Yeah, well, thank you, Benji.
Nice, yeah. So I was thinking today we can discuss more about cultural identity of our family as a whole, but even just our journey. Because we're currently in Tanzania, or as some people say, Tanzania. And we've just spent a day tracing back our father's steps, um, which I'm sure we can discuss more in detail another time, but it has raised a lot of questions and things to process about cultural identity, and in fact our whole journey as a whole has.
Yeah, sounds like a plan. And I guess, yeah, the special context of this episode is it feels like we've turned or finished a chapter in terms of exploring where Dad had travelled in East Africa, Dar es Salaam, which means House of Peace, which is the main capital of Tanzania, was where Dad was born. So by going to all the places we've just been to today and we had a chance just to sit down and just reflect on that, it feels like we've just finished a chapter and been able to explore a different aspect of our dad's identity and our family's identity, but it's also connected us to a larger ecosystem of other East African Indians and their journeys across continents, and you know how that's affected us, but also many other people across the world as well. So the special focus here is really on especially on our dad's identity, just because we're in the place of his birth.
Exactly, and that obviously links into our identity. So our father's family are a Bengali family from India, and they went in, I think, the late 40s or early 50s to Tanzania. So my grandfather worked with the East African Railways, and he was a ticket inspector. So he went to help the British, help oversee some of the railway industry. So he obviously took his family with him, and my father was the second youngest of 9, and the majority of them were born in Dar es Salaam. So they spent a lot of time here, and after Tanzania became independent, they made it hard for people to have dual citizenship, so many people left, and our family went back to India, to near Calcutta, where they were based. And then my father, after university, he went to England. That's where he met my mom, and all of the rest is history. But it was really interesting just to see the connection between Indians in Tanzania. The disappointing thing is that there's hardly any history. We went to the National Museum, the National Archives, the National Library, the Railway Corporation, and we found zero official information about our family at all. And we even asked about Indians in the railway, and there wasn't any information at all. However, we did manage to trace back some steps of where Dad was based, and it reminds you about how connected the world actually is. Today was very nice. After a lot of research, we actually found Dad's old house, or housing area at least. We found his old primary school, and we even found the actual home, or building rather, that he was born in. And we managed to go inside and even go into one of the apartments in that building. So that was very special. But in that area, there's loads of buildings that are very faded now, but were built in the 50s by Indian families, and Indians still live alongside the African Tanzanians, and it was really beautiful to see, and it also links into our experience in Kenya, where once our father became a Christian, he felt God calling him back to East Africa to work among the Asian diaspora, or diaspora as Judah might say, and that's why we grew up in Kenya. So we spent 7 years in Kenya, and that's what we were processing last trip, and the cultural identity aspect is a big thing that we think about because our both parents are Indian origin. We grew up in Kenya and have spent a lot of our life in England, so there's all of that connection. And India is massive, of course. So our mum is from a different part of India, so her family are Sikh Punjabi background, and mum came when she was 2 or 3 to come to England. So even her dad from India would have had different backgrounds, and yeah, that kind of brings us into our cultural identity.
Yeah, and it definitely makes you think of dad being born in Dar es Salaam, which is basically just the kind of the sea border of Tanzania, and what identity he would have had. We went to his school today, talked to the head teacher, and it was a Catholic school led by nuns, and it would have been one for all the rich foreign families as well as any kind of big people in parliament. So dad would have brushed shoulders with the elite whilst in Dar es Salaam, and then we know at some point around high school he would have gone to India. So he would have had quite an interesting identity by being able to speak Swahili but also Bengali, and most likely moving in between those languages as well as English. And then we know at the age of 21, after he did his high school and degree in India, and we'll be able to see that hopefully a lot more when we go there early next year, that he moved to the UK. And so he had a range of identities, and that was reflected in his accent as well. And in terms of the way he spoke, basically. And I know for us, when we had gone to Kenya and we came back, we had American, kind of a hybrid accent, you could say. And I remember going to primary school, and I was in year 5, and then you could see that like the Pakistani boys were a bit confused about trying to suss me out, because they were Pakistani Muslim at the school that we went to in Birmingham, and we were Indian Christian from Africa with an American accent. And so you could see, even though we looked ethnically the same, we were worlds apart in terms of our identities. And so that was kind of an interesting thing of, for us, arriving back to our technical homeland, and the challenges that really we've faced by, I guess, being in a minority in most of the places and churches we've been in, ever since arriving back in 2003. And that's why this cultural identity, this theme, has been really special for us, because both in Kenya and Tanzania, there are lots of Indian communities who are basically Indian Kenyan or Indian Tanzanian, and the Christians are often from different religious backgrounds, often Hinduism, like my mum and dad. So dad was Hindu, mum was Sikh, and so it's maybe the first time in our lives recently where we're connecting with people who have these hybrid identities, and it's just really fun, and which we've never really had in our churches. Really, in Birmingham, the main church did have a few Asians, South Asians, but in Leeds, we've kind of been the only ones apart from one, and so that's been really special in terms of seeing how they interact, but also some of the values that we have, which is living with family. Kind of the love and respect for our elders, and we lived, our mum until recently she moved out, but we lived with her for a few years, and for some of our English friends who are in our age and stage, I don't think they could comprehend that, in terms of it's normally seen as a very heroic thing from their point of view for us living with our mum, where actually we've been around the world and seen it's quite normal for people to live with their parents until they get married. And even so, our English friends who came with us to Egypt and who lived by himself, and we all lived together as brothers, actually he was a weird one and we were the normal one, living together with a family. So once you take us out of the more individualistic nuclear family model of England, and we go into different environments, we find that our situation is actually quite similar to others. So Benji and I have had great appreciation and, a sense of acceptance and feeling comfortable in these environments which are completely away from home in the UK, but yet they have the similar value systems in some aspect by really understanding what it's like to be a convert from religion, from like Hinduism or Sikhism, and also being raised as a Christian, but when your family are from a different religion, and it's just not the same as someone who, someone from maybe an English background, from a society where spirituality and religion isn't as serious in terms of overall how the society functions these days. And so, yeah, these are just some reflections. I'll let Benji take over, but this is just to guess a bit of context of how when we talk about cultural identity, and you listening here today, I'm sure you will be able to maybe think about which, how have your parents and the place that you've been raised in impacted you, but you realize that actually it's a melting pot, but it's messy cultural identity, and it can change from moment to moment and year to year, and especially who you're speaking to. And the question of where you're from often can be a complicated answer depending on what the listener wants, and also for the person who's giving the information, how much they want to really give, because it's quite confusing sometimes to explain yourself, especially when people want an easy answer. So right now, generally when Benji and I are traveling, we say we're from India. It makes things a lot easier. We don't have to worry so much about how to explain ourselves, and they don't normally ask so many follow-up questions. But of course that's not true. But if we were to say Kenya or the UK, that wouldn't be fully true either. And so there's all this stuff, and this episode we're talking about cultural identity, but another one we could talk about maybe religious identity being abroad, because that is an important part for us as well. So yeah, that's just a sense for my part anyway of just the interweaving, the complexity, the interplay between different identities that many people will sit in kind of during their lifetime, especially those who are parents from different countries, and emigrated to the UK or to a different nation as well.
Yeah, that's really good stuff, Judah. And it reminds me of that, that concept called a TCK, so third culture kid. And I think the definition is when a child is brought up in a culture who's different to their parents. And so even if their parents are the same culture, if the children are brought up in a different culture, I think the idea is that creates a third culture, hence the TCK. And in the increasingly globalized world that we live in, that's more and more common. And like I was saying at the beginning, for us there was that even deeper complexity, because both our parents were from different cultures, and we grew up in a place different to our parents' culture, and then settled in a place different to our parents' culture, so there's, I don't know, QCK or something. But yeah, it's like Judah said, that question of where is home, things change, and in fact this trip, I think things are changing. I've always thought that the interesting thing is that I obviously look Indian, but that's the part of my identity that I probably feel the least connection to, just because I've never lived there. I've only been there for 2 weeks when I was a toddler with no memories. But perhaps next year, when we, God willing, spend a few months there, things might change completely. And it's made me feel much more comfortable being in Kenya, and kind of like, feeling like Kenya is home, because I used to feel a bit insecure saying I was from Kenya when people ask me, do you know Swahili? No. Where were you living? Nairobi. Which part of Nairobi? No idea. So I didn't really know as much. But now I feel like I've actually seen how much close family friends and even family we have in Nairobi. And comparing how we felt in Tanzania compared to Kenya, we definitely felt much more comfortable in Kenya. Tanzania felt very foreign to us, so that shows how comfortable we felt. And also the cultural aspect of being British. While travelling, it has made me realize how kind of British I am. Um, and I think sometimes, yeah, I think sometimes if you're in a main culture, you don't necessarily appreciate um, or even notice the culture, right? If you're in the majority culture, you might not even notice. And perhaps I didn't realize the British impact that, or the British culture that I had kind of grown up in and learned to swim in. And it was interesting. In Tanzania, we met a Tanzanian Indian guy, and he was talking about like how the European people that come to Tanzania, they always plan ahead. And he was like, yeah, you were doing that. Like he was like, you know, you were messaging me, just checking the day before if things are okay. You know, planning days in advance. And it was quite funny because I felt like my initial reaction was to kind of be a bit annoyed that he kind of sussed me out and associated me with being European, especially if it's a place maybe that I haven't felt as kind of comfortable sometimes being in England, and not feeling English. It was yeah, it was interesting. I was like, oh man, like am I that kind of predictable where I'm from? But then I realized that it's not a surprise that actually that I would be like that, and there's many positive things of British culture and you know things that I miss, and things that I love with my English friends. So it's been nice to realize that, and yeah, it's just funny to see the you know how like planning in advance for social occasions has just become so normal to me because so many of my friends that I've got to know, especially my English friends, you just have to plan in advance. So it's quite common to say, okay, 2 weeks time on Wednesday evening, let's meet up, and then the next person you're planning them on Thursday evening, and you know you're trying to sort of plan around, and and yeah, and so for people here that's that can be quite a foreign thing. So that's just a little example. But as Judah said, the religion plays a very big difference because culture, like religion's a big part of culture, right? And the fact is that we are, I guess what you'd call second generation Christians. So our parents converted, but no one in their family is practicing the same religion. But we grew up in that religion, and it's so we're kind of not as in touch with other aspects of our family background because a lot of it is religious. Like my father was from a Brahmin Hindu priest background, and even my grandmother on my mum's side was a Sikh priestess. So if you're naturally not going to the places of worship, you're not going to understand as much of the culture. So that's something that we kind of are kind of wrestling with and seeing, okay, which parts are culture, which parts are religion. And even here in Kenya, like there's still there's still for some people the impression that you know Christianity is a white man's religion or a European thing when actually it started in the Middle East with a brown skinned like carpenter, you know, and started in that part of the world before it spread. So before it became this big, you know, state religion of many European countries, it had already traveled through Asia and parts of Africa. So it's just trying to process all of that stuff with identity, and this journey has been really helpful for us to sort of process and see how we feel, and and like Judah said, if people ask where we're from, they're not as used to people outside England and maybe other countries with higher immigration, like I don't know, Canada, Australia, USA. If you say that you're from England, then they might look at you kind of quizzically or slightly confused, or if so it's just easier sometimes just to say India because that's what they're expecting to hear, right? And also I've got a theory, I don't know how true it is, but I've got a theory that they rip you off a bit less if you say you're from India, because if they associate you with from Europe, then they associate you with being white. So some people here call us Muzungu, which means white, if they find out we're from England, and that's an association that you have lots of money. So by saying Indian and then we bargain hard, I think, yeah, they're more prepared for it.
Definitely. And it's, yeah, helpful to hear your reflections, Benji, and it's made me think as well how, I guess how our cultural identity is shifting and evolving based on traveling, and how it's, I guess, both challenged and enriched our understanding of our own roots. So there's probably been an interesting feelings of feeling connected to the Indian identity, the British identity, but also our East African identity. I think that's what would be different for me now. I'd say Dad was born in Tanzania and we were raised in Kenya, so I'd probably define myself as a British East African Indian, because that takes into account the region, and that's kind of formed our identity and also our dad's identity. Now, in terms of traveling, I guess yes, we tell people the easy option of that we're from India, just because that's what people are looking for, really, to help them understand what we look like. But in terms of us traveling around and how we, I don't know, how we navigate it, I guess it really depends on who we're speaking with. And often if we meet other Indian Christians from church, I think they kind of understand a bit more, have operating as a minority within a country, and also like very like not well, like in Tanzania there's pretty much no records of the Indians here and their work. But then in Kenya, there's this really established Indians, and there's one called Chandaria. A family has been around for over 100 years, and they've established hospitals and like a massive supermarket. So just really well known. So they're really integrated into the country, and that's something, I guess, a sense of pride that they're Kenyan as well. So I feel like I'm absorbing, or I'm kind of seeing myself as part of a bigger East African picture.
Yeah.
And even the books that we've been reading has changed. So I read a book, Barack Obama's Dreams from My Father, which is him basically growing up without a dad and then basically going back to Kenya, where his dad was from, and all the complexities that have come from the different identities and what he's hit with in many ways when he comes to Kenya. And was probably around the same late 20s when he was in Kenya, or early 30s, so around the same stage as us, where really we started to formulate our identity, but especially we're reaching and grasping and trying to understand our identity from our father's past, because we can't ask him the questions. So by walking into the places today, his school, where he would have been born, where he lived, there's something about just sitting there and being able to walk in those footsteps, which just gave a level of grounding for me. I think obviously it's only new, because it just happened today. But anyway, that just a few confused reflections from me. Anyway.
Yeah, no, it's good to know. It's we're processing things and seeing how we think about cultural identity, and I think that aspect of being a TCK. I think one thing that we realize is that we feel most comfortable when we're not in a monocultural setting. So by that, I actually feel very comfortable when I'm with people from all different countries, especially people that are from that are also from different cultures. Like our friend Frederick from Nairobi, who we actually wanted to record this episode with him on this topic, but we were having too much fun in Lamu, which is a really beautiful Swahili island off the north coast of Kenya. But he was born in Sweden to a Moroccan and Indian parents, and then grew up in Morocco, and then went to France, and then has lived in all different places, including West Africa, US, and now Kenya. So someone like that, we kind of got along straight away. There's just lots of things in common. So that's something that I realized. It's like if I'm in any of the one setting, let's say I'm with only Kenyans or only Indians or only English people for a longer period of time, then I can often feel distant and not really part of it, because there's a flavor of all of it, you know. Like we've been visiting churches because that's our faith is a big part of our identity, and you know, we could conceivably go to a English majority church one week, and then what's actually happened the last 2 Sundays is that we went in Kenya, in Lamu, to a Swahili speaking Methodist church, and then in Tanzania we went to a Gujarati speaking house fellowship church. Both very, very different, right? Different languages, different culture, different setup, and there was lots of foreign elements, but we also felt comfortable in both, you know. So there's that aspect of sometimes I felt I don't fit in anywhere, but then I kind of changed around to noticing that I fit in more places, and I can connect to different cultures and build bridges easier than maybe some other people could, you know. We're kind of accepted into lots of different communities in a way that other people wouldn't, but it's been very nice to kind of touch base with different things. I think, like Judah said as well, the East African Indian Christian community, you know, because that's quite a niche minority community that we are connected with. That's been very special being part of it, and even on Sunday at the Gujarati speaking house fellowship, it was really special, you know, singing Gujarati songs, Hindi songs, and at one point it was funny. I kind of looked down, maybe when we were praying or I was just reflecting, and I looked, and I just saw everyone's feet were just brown like me, and it was a very small moment, and but yeah, I just felt very connected to my Indian identity, because here were my Indian brothers and sisters in a Christian setting, which is my primary identity, you know. So that was very, very special, and I don't know the last time of being around, you know, East African Indian Christians. So that was very special, and we actually connected with one of the other young people there, and we went out and explored different things. So yeah, those are some more of my reflections.
Yeah, really helpful, Benji. And maybe just to finish, because I guess for what the themes that are coming up between our conversation now is, you know, connection with ourselves and other people, and in the sense of being at home in many different environments, but sometimes wondering what home is. So I actually wrote a poem a few years ago called Home. I'd love to share it, and then I think that will be towards the end of our podcast. So this poem is called Home. What is this feeling inside of disconnect and other? This sense of separation from even mother and brother, blocked from real touch like a hand that is gloved, halting me from believing that I am unconditionally loved. I sense such a loss that's deep within my bones. Yearning for connection, my whole spirit groans. I look deep inside, and it seems so dark. It's hard to caress my deeply hurting heart. Perhaps it is ego or my unbridled pride, inflated by fear and the tumult inside. Or perhaps it is trust in my own ability, or the use of humor and charm to mask true vulnerability. Whatever it is, I long to be shown, wherever I am, that I am not all alone. In life's ups and downs, in all daily moans, to know that I am loved, to know that I am home. And that one I wrote it probably in my mid-20s, which is quite standard for what they call the quarter-life crisis. You're trying to figure out your identity and who you are. And the big thing for me now is that I'm home and my cultural identity, and I wanted to finish with this. The most important one for me is my cultural identity, which is in Christ. Right. Jesus was the same age as me when he started his ministry, but he would have had family expectations on him, and he would have faced rejection. He would have felt he would have been between different worlds. He spent a few years in Egypt as a refugee, and he would have had lots of expectations on him, lots of things to navigate, and so actually, what my quest really for this year is not just finding about my dad's story, which is really important, but the biggest thing for me is by understanding my dad's story, it'll help me connect with the greater story of Christ, and being connected to other greats, which the lineage for me is so powerful and important within my Christian identity. And so that's, for me, Benji and I feel the most at home, would say, is when we're with other people and we're praising God. And it really is really powerful, especially when they're from other backgrounds, but even if they're not, something about after I've prayed, if there's a monocultural setting, maybe they're only the Kenyans, Kikuyu, a tribe of Kenyans, maybe we're with Gujaratis. There's something, once we've prayed and we've praised and in their language, the atmosphere changes and it softens, and I stop seeing them as different than me, and I see more like how I'm the same as them. There's similarities, and so that's the biggest thing for me when it comes to cultural identity, is something that doesn't change and is rocked, and it is like a rock and rooted. And for me, my hope is, as I want to let go of my dad, I want to hold on and cling closer onto Christ, and that's the way that I believe for myself that my identity will be secure. So I just want to finish on that, and thank you so much for listening. As well, really appreciate you.
That's deep, Judah. Amen to that. And thank you to everyone for listening, and please feel free to follow and rate the podcast, and let us know what you think. Feel free just to message Judah and me, and we have some very interesting topics that we love to speak about. This is just almost like an audio channel, but we're bringing our friends, family, and new friends along with us. Any specific topics you want to hear about, then let us know. And there's going to be loads of random, wide-ranging ones if I can persuade Judah to sit down and record with me. But before that, we are going to Egypt for a friend's wedding. And after that, we're coming back to Tanzania. And then we'll go back to Kenya. So, so we have big adventures coming up. Don't know what topics will open up. But the big ones, like Judah said, we've kind of been through. So let's see what opens up now. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. And as you say in Swahili, asante sana, or you can say shukrani sana, which is similar to Arabic, shukran.
Kwaheri.
Okay, kwaheri.